right, entries are slowing down, so we'll go ahead and get started with our welcome and introductions. Sarah, if you could give me my next slide. All right, great, thank you. So welcome to the fifth of 4 workshops. Added a bonus one because we liked spending time with you all so much. This is, as I mentioned, the 5th workshop talking about the stakeholder engagement proposal for the Pathways Step 2 proposal. As many of you may have noticed in the Step 2 proposal that went out a couple weeks ago, it did not include a revised sector proposal. So that's what we're here to talk about today. Heard a lot of feedback from folks that the sector proposal as it stood in the discussion document wasn't quite right. And so looking to get some more input and feedback on that today. And as with the other portions of the Step 2 proposal, you'll have an opportunity to comment on the refined sector proposal. That comment period is the same as the rest of the comment period for the Step 2 proposal. We'll go into more detail on that in the end to make sure everyone knows what comes next. Next slide, please. So in order to get to a refined sector proposal, first we want to make sure that everyone is on the same page about what exactly the Stakeholder Representatives Committee is intended to do and how it's intended to function. And so we'll have some folks from the launch committee review the Stakeholder Representatives Committee proposal that was included in the Step 2 document. We'll also do a review of the sector proposal as it stands right now. We'll have lots of opportunity for input and ideas that folks have for strengthening the sector proposal. And then, as I mentioned, we'll close out and make sure folks understand what's coming next with a revised proposal, opportunities to comment on that, and of course, opportunities for the stakeholder process as a whole to continue to evolve over time. Next slide. So this mirrors our outcomes as I just discussed. We'll be spending about the first 45 minutes of our time together talking about the Stakeholder Representatives Committee. And then we'll get into the current sector proposal and feedback that we heard from y'all. And then the latter half of the workshop is really devoted to discussion and input on that sector proposal. So I'm going to pause here and do some introductions as we've done in our last workshops. If you are presenting in any portion of the agenda today, I'd love for you to introduce yourself. If you are really excited to participate today, I'd love for you to introduce yourself. If you've never been with us or if you've never participated before, I'd also love to hear from you. So I will model our intros. We're going to do name, organization, launch committee, sector affiliation. Serena, if I could have you pop those in the chat. And then I'm curious to know what is one thing you're going to do with all the free time that you have when Pathways workshops and comments slow down a bit. Elaine, I see you have your hand up. I'll have you go first.
Let me undo everything. Hi, yeah, Elaine Ginocchio. I am with the Public Interest Sector of Pathways. I'm a consultant, but I represent Western Resource Advocates in this effort. I'm going to be making some comments for PIOs on sectors further on in the meeting. And the one thing I'm going to do, can it be just one? Hike, sleep, travel. Okay, thanks.
Great. Thanks so much, Elaine. Kathleen, as usual, I'm going to pick on you.
That is totally fine. That question is one that I think about a lot. I'm Kathleen Stacks. I'm the Executive Director of Western Freedom and the co-chair of the Pathways Initiative Launch Committee. I represent large commercial and industrial customers. And the sleep piece is something that's really appealing. I might even catch up on the rest of the work that I have to do. I think my team is dreading it. I've warned them. I'm going to come back and get involved again. But I think our Pathways work, at least for some of us, is going to continue for a bit.
Yeah, Kathleen's not as much off the hook as many of the rest of us. Let's see. Any other folks excited to introduce themselves? Otherwise, I might just call on a few folks that I know or see. Quiet crowd this morning. Let's see. Do we have Pam on the line?
Hi, sorry, I'm on the phone and restarting my computer. Zoom crashed on me.
Oh no.
But I always have Zoom issues. But I'm Pam Sporborg. I am with Portland General Electric, and with Kathleen, I am the co-chair of the launch committee. And when Pathways is over, I will turn my attention to implementing PGE's commitment to the extended day ahead market. So there's no rest for the weary.
Thanks, Pam. Let's see. No, we have some other folks who are going to be sharing their perspectives today. Is Scott Olson on the line? Sorry, I can only see so many names on my screen at once. Hey, there's Scott.
Hi there. Yep, Scott Olson. I am one of the sector leads for the RIF, the IPP and marketing sector lead. My day job is I am the director of Western US markets regionalization and policy for Avangrid Renewables. I am going to try to see much more live music. I was just in Austin, Texas for some family matters and really upset I didn't go to Austin City Limits Music Festival, and I have a few lined up here in the Bay Area.
Great. Thanks, Scott. I just got to see some live music last night, so definitely feel you on that. Is Laura Tenney Dennison on the line?
Hey, good morning. Lauren Tenney Dennison. I am with the Public Power Council. I am also a RIF liaison for the consumer-owned utility sector. And I think that under the Pathways proposal, or the sectors, I fall under the consumer-owned utility sector as well. I think covering a lot of once this is wrapped up, like other people have said, there's just a lot of other things going on. So have appreciated these discussions, but we'll look forward to some time back to work on other things as well.
Thanks, Lauren. Is Josh Walter on the line?
Yeah, hi, Josh Walter. I'm with Seattle City Light. I manage our long-term purchase power and transmission portfolio and our regional energy policy group. I am affiliated with the public power community from the launch committee, but I'm also affiliated with the EIM entity sector as a RIF liaison. So kind of pulling a little bit of double duty. I have not changed much of my live music viewing over the course of this endeavor, so I'll continue with that. Also been seeing quite a few shows lately, but post Pathways we'll largely be working on substantiating or working on our own internal decision on day-ahead market evolution, as well as working on and helping with new resource acquisition and integration into our portfolio.
Great. Thanks so much, Josh. Any other folks on the line who think they're going to have thoughts and feelings about this SRC and our sectors today, who would like to introduce themselves? I see a Sam off of mute.
Yeah, hi, good morning. This is Sam Harper. I'm here representing CLECA, the California Large Energy Consumers Association. Looking forward to the discussion.
Great. Sam, anything you are looking forward to doing once you no longer have to attend Pathways workshops?
You know, I have two young kids, and so I don't think I'll be attending much live music for the next few years, but appreciate all the live music discussion there.
All right. Thanks, Sam. And I see that Vijay has his hand up.
Yes, hi, Vijay Satyal, WRA. I missed the first 7 minutes, but I did come back from a very good concert on Friday. He's a well-known performer and performs well-known, unique Sufi music from around Asia and Persia. So I don't know what to say about that. But in terms of this topic, I may have some thoughts based on what we hear, having worked on or been part of sectors being formed with the RAP, being engaged with the RIF as a RIF public interest sector liaison. And I think Josh and I go back a ways. And of course, the other thing I would like to be aware of is that any comments or concerns, if anybody brings up, it hopefully is connected to where in that proposal that they are referring to, so we can then be mindful of that as we provide our response or comments. So I'm a, if need be, response kind of representative here. Thank you.
Thanks, Vijay. All right, well, oh, I see one more hand. Michael.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. Michael Colvin with Environmental Defense Fund, and I'm also in the public interest organization sector. I think as we're trying to think through the SRC, one of the lenses that I'm looking for, unsurprisingly, given my affiliation with EDF, but there are a lot of other sectors that are going to be looking at monetary benefits and reliability benefits. I'm going to be looking at how can the SRC help think through both the environmental benefits and then the overall timeline of the markets, and just under the thesis of we've built into the charter of pathways a lot of things on environmental benefits, including emissions reductions. And I think that the SRC itself has a really important role in ensuring that we uphold that part of the charter. And so making certain that we are not losing some of the other perspectives. So I think that the draft document that's out there does a really good job at that. I think there's more to be done, but that's one of the things that I'm going to be trying to look at during this conversation.
Thanks, Michael. And we'll take our last intro from Colin Smith.
I'm a local affairs manager at the response aggregator based in California.
Colin, your audio is quite garbled. And now there is no audio.
How about now?
Perfect.
Great. Sorry about that. Yeah, my name is Colin Smith. I'm a regulatory affairs manager at LEAP, a demand response aggregator based in California. Looking forward to the discussion. I've enjoyed the past discussions. Will be sad when there are no other discussions, but given the timing of these working group calls in the middle of the workday, I'm sure I will find plenty of other things to take up my time, given how much is going on in the demand response and DER space in California.
Man, lots of hard workers in this group. Okay. Well, thank you all for introducing yourselves and humoring me. If anyone has good live music recommendations, feel free to drop those in the chat. That sounds like that's what should have been my icebreaker question. With that, I think I'm going to turn things over to Kathleen and Pam to get us started with some context setting about the Stakeholder Representatives Committee.
Thanks, Neha. So part of what we wanted to do for this workshop today was get everybody on the same page, understanding what the various roles and responsibilities are associated with the SRC and with being a representative on the SRC. I think from the time that we put out our original stakeholder process proposal to the point where we put out our full proposal a week or so ago, we added quite a bit of detail, realizing that we, I think, hadn't quite gotten all on the same page about exactly what we wanted this thing to do. So we had refined it based on some stakeholder comments that we received on that stakeholder process proposal.
I don't know.
And then wanted to make sure that we talked through that as we we work on revising our proposal around the sectors, and what those sectors are. Again, because I think that how the sectors, what sectors we have, should be founded on what we want these sectors to do, and how they are showing up, and what their role is in the stakeholder process that we are proposing here. So we wanted to really take the time, I think, to ensure that we had common understanding of what the SRC is going to do. Next slide, please. So we set this, there's sort of a pyramid with some up and down flow that we wanted to kind of talk through as far as the SRC goes. But fundamentally, and Pam, chime in here anytime. Fundamentally, we want to start with the individual organization. In the stakeholder process that we are recommending for the RO, the individual organization has a lot of ability to engage, a lot of responsibility, a lot of way to really track the input and feedback from an individual organization. We don't want the individual organization to get lost in a sector. We wanted to set up a structure that is able to account for the input of each individual organization, recognizing that no matter how we set up these sectors, there's going to be some overlap. You could sort of, you know, any given entity could probably fit into a couple of different categories. So wanting to make sure that we are really able to capture each organization's voice and input in this process was something that was really important. Feeding up into the sector representative, this is the person that is going to represent a sector on the SRC. And that sector representative is going to be tasked with reaching out to the individual organizations within the sector and making sure that they are collecting input, having conversations with their sector about prioritization of initiatives, you know, sort of facilitating that input and discussion among the individual organizations, and then feeding that back up into the full SRC. And so that sector representative really has both the external sort of input gathering and facilitation, as well as the internal collaboration amongst other sector representatives to really ensure that the various perspectives are captured in those SRC conversations. The goal is really trying to find consensus and facilitating that stakeholder comment and engagement, and to ensure, again, that we're bringing the diverse perspectives from those organizations into this process. The SRC itself is supposed to kind of work, again, having all of those representatives working together to find consensus, and is as a whole providing recommendations and is serving as an advisory role to the RO board. So as we've walked through the process that we've proposed in previous workshops, the SRC is really the one that is making recommendations to the RO board on things like the cataloging and roadmap, as well as along the way through the various stakeholder initiatives. And then the RO board ultimately is the one that makes the decision based on and is supposed to take the input and feedback from the SRC, as well as all of the sort of individual organization information that we are collecting. So for example, when there's going to be a vote, which is an indicative vote, the underlying characteristics of each of the organizations will be captured and presented to the RO board as part of the final recommendation, so that the board can see not only the distribution of input and feedback by sector, but by some of the sub characteristics. So whether that's geography or business type, you know, there's a whole long list of characteristics that individual organizations can sort of track for themselves that will be part of the information that gets to the RO board. I'll pause. Pam, did you have anything you want to add to that?
Sure. I think the important concept here is that advocacy continues to be at the individual organization level. So each company or organization will have the opportunity to advocate directly with policy staff, with management, and with the RO board, whereas the sector representatives and the SRC are meant to try to drive consensus and help illuminate the differences in opinion either within a sector or between sectors. So again, individual advocacy remains at the organizational level, where sector representatives really just help coalesce and articulate where their sector is coming from. And we think this is particularly important given the diversity of individual organizations around the West, where sector differences could include things like a geographic perspective. We've seen frequently where the Pacific Northwest and the Desert Southwest have divergent perspectives on a given initiative, but also where those sectors can come together and help try to drive consensus and really understand and help illuminate those differences so that they can be resolved at the sector level and help drive towards a consensus position. And then the SRC really has that opportunity to help drive consensus across sectors and build those kinds of relationships and coalitions that will help ensure that a stakeholder process is moving forward consistent with the stakeholder community's feedback and perspective by really helping build and drive that consensus. However, the individual organization's advocacy remains critically important through every step of this process, including to engaging directly with the RO board as each company determines its own priorities for that engagement.
Thanks, Pam. Next slide, please. So part of what we also wanted to convey today was some of the sort of expectations from a time and responsibility standpoint for the SRC. Again, the role of a SRC sector representative is to provide advice and input and to facilitate and support the participation of those individual organizations and stakeholders within the stakeholder process, both individually and at the sector level. That SRC representative is going to be responsible for delineating any guidelines and procedures for the conduct of the SRC within the stakeholder process. And we need people who are going to, as representatives, are going to be committed to supporting and facilitating the participation of the stakeholder community and the members in the stakeholder process, even if those perspectives don't align necessarily with that SRC representative, their position on a specific issue. We need, because of the critical role of the SRC and the representatives that make that up, set an expectation of at least 80% of participation in meetings. We have also talked about enabling an alternate. So having a depending on how many seats there are on the SRC for a given sector, having an alternate is something that we think may enable better and more robust participation from sectors. So I think that's something else to keep in mind here too. It's not captured in this particular slide deck, but we've talked in other workshops and even in the proposal about having the ability for virtual participation, so remote voting and being able to have virtual access, having online meetings so that we can really enable as robust of participation by individual organizations as possible. So really trying to make this a very accessible process, but recognizing that those people who are going to be sitting on the SRC are going to be really important roles within this entire process, and it will be time consuming. And I think at this point, well, and Pam, maybe I'll pause and see if you have anything additional to add here too, but I think it might also be helpful to hear from some folks who have participated in some of the various stakeholder processes that we have sort of drawn from. So that's everything from the RIF to the RAP stakeholder process. I haven't participated in these, so I'm going to screw up any of the actual names. Any of the Markets Plus or SPP, or even other RTO or ISO stakeholder processes, trying to get an understanding of what this time commitment and effort really will look like. And before I go, Colin, yes, these are volunteer positions. So yeah, but it is a decent time commitment here. So Pam, did you have anything you wanted to add on this too?
Sure, and I think to Colin's question, each sector will self-select their SRC representatives from within the sector itself. And I think in our original proposal, we had noted some ways that the sector nomination process could take place, or have multiple, or respect some of the diversity within sectors. And I think that this is a evolution, to Kathleen's point. This is an evolution from where we are today with the Regional Issues Forum. And I think if we could queue up a couple of our folks who've had that experience with the Regional Issues Forum, it is a significant time commitment today. Even as the primary goal is that education and coordination role. And as we look to expand that to be more of a consensus building and direct engagement with policy staff, that time commitment is likely to expand, and I think would be a pretty significant commitment of time. That, I think, to Colin's point, goes to the need to ensure that there's a diverse candidate pool for each sector, so that each sector is really able to have someone take on that position. It is a really good opportunity to build relationships and enhance a more deep, nuanced understanding of the policy process. I know I significantly benefited from my time on the Regional Issues Forum and really engaging with other sectors and really working a lot of phone calls to bring both my sector together and to understand the priorities of others around the region. But this would go even further, as a lot of that work would take place on the stakeholder process itself. And as that stakeholder process is moving forward, I see Scott has turned his camera on, so I will take it to you to also share your perspectives as well.
I was hoping Josh was going to turn his camera on. He used to be one of the RIF leads, and I think would be a nice segue for all of the good comments that you made, Pam. But I'll go ahead and kick it off. Josh can talk more about, I think, the general items that the RIF actually do engage upon. Mary just raised her hand, so perhaps she had a question about what you just mentioned, Pam.
This is Mary. I just raised my hand because I have a comment, but I didn't want to interrupt you, Scott.
Oh, please go right ahead.
Okay. And I don't have, this is Mary Winky. Sorry, I should introduce myself, with the public generating pool. And I don't have specific experience being on the RIF, but I do have some experience with this kind of sort of committee representative roles. I've been a liaison on the BOSSER, and then also that participated in the Markets Plus process, and I've witnessed the RIF over many years. And I think my observation with this is there is kind of a minimum level of commitment that is required, but it is also really something that I think you get out of it what you put into it. And I think our experience has been you know, that there's really a lot of value associated with, you know, coordinating across the sector, or coordinating within a sector, coordinating across sectors, just to kind of work toward collaborative and consensus approaches. But that doesn't really work if people aren't really into it. You know, if people aren't that interested in a particular topic, or it's not their highest priority, or things like that, you can't really force people to collaborate, you know, if it's not a priority for them. So I think this is likely to evolve over time, but I don't think we want to. I would think, at least this would be my perspective, the concept isn't really to like force everyone to, you know, put in a certain amount of time. It is really people who can kind of self-select, hopefully on particular issues that are important to them, and really kind of put into it what you kind of expect to get out of it, is kind of how I'm thinking about it. So it, you know, it can be kind of a sector by sector, organization by organization kind of decision with respect to how much they really want to kind of focus and put into this.
Mary, thank you for that perspective. I think you've really hit on one of the core challenges with getting the sector definitions right, is ensuring that the sector definition is broad enough to have enough people who have the time and are really willing to put that effort in to get all of those benefits that you articulated out, but also that there's more than just one or two people who are willing to do that for their sector, so that we can have that ongoing engagement, even as the representatives rotate off, that there is someone behind, you know, willing and engaged behind them to help continue that sector engagement and representation. So I think that's the balance we're trying to strike, and I hope that we can get more comments from the group as we go on. I think we should first hear, let Scott finish his thoughts, and then we'll hear from Josh, and then maybe pause and take questions, and then if other folks with this kind of experience would like to chime in, that would be great.
Thanks, Pam. So when it comes to engagement in the RIF, I'll give folks a little bit of perspective, just general commitments that RIF sector liaisons have, and then some specific items that are done within their individual sectors. Then I'll comment about the specific items that the IPP and marketers sectors has had recently as part of our engagement in the RIF, which I think is very applicable to the SRC discussion about how fine do you want to cut the number of representatives in this, how many might be too many, and what should be done potentially for efficiency, which I think is a good part of the discussion that we're having here. So RIF sector liaisons meet twice a month, basically every couple of weeks, to talk about items that are important both for current initiatives as well as ongoing things, in order to schedule items like our meetings that we have, the public forums that we have, as well as some of our major initiatives that we get engaged in. One of the big items, which will become even more important, obviously, as the SRC hopefully launches as part of this RO, is the policy roadmap. So folks are probably aware that the California ISO has revamped their approach to the policy roadmap. And while the RIF leads have always worked with their sectors in order to provide a recommendation or set of recommendations to the California ISO about what policies are most important to their sector, starting this year, as folks have been engaged with the CAISO roadmap have probably seen, they've really taken a lot more of that input and recommendations to heart in defining the policy roadmap. And we think, or at least I think, going to an SRC RO role, that will become even more important. This engagement cannot be taken lightly for the amount of time and effort, especially considering who is in your sector and the diversity of opinion in your sector. So for example, in the IPP and marketers sector, we have about 80 or so different members within the RIF. The way that we go about trying to provide recommendations is we have a list historically of the items that have been most important to our sector. We then will survey our sector brand new every year to say, hey, here are the items we've talked about having priorities in the past. Do you still think these items are of priority? What are the new items that could be important to you going forward? And then those all get amalgamated together to come up with a set of recommendations that feeds both the RIF discussion as well as to the California ISO in the form of presentations, as well as input into this policy roadmap. We also will hold meetings internally within the IPPM sector. We schedule them every month, but usually every 2 months is how myself and Rahul Kalaskar from AES typically hold them, just based on how much that we have going on. And then the other item, for those of you that listened in to the most recent RIF sector public meeting back in September on CRRs and other items, is we as RIF sector leads talk about what are the really important topics that might be important to the broad sector of stakeholders that we want to present on formally. And just a quick plug, if you are in Sacramento on October 29th, we'll be having an in-person RIF meeting as well. One comment, again, that I want to make about how fine do you cut this sector, I think will be important to this conversation. So it's a lot of work. If you listen to anything I just said in the last however many minutes I rambled, you might go, oh boy, is that really how much that's going to be important now or going forward? And I think the answer is it'll probably just build on itself as part of the SRC. And back to Colin's point, it is a voluntary position. Folks that lead these will do this on top of their day job as well. Within the IPPM sector, we have a very broad set of opinions. We have a very broad set of membership. And the question has come up, is it too big? Do we need to be split because we have behind the meter folks, in front of the meter folks, wind, solar, every sort of technology under the sun for development? Do we as a sector, say myself and AES and the folks that advocate for this sector, are they being able to advocate appropriately for all the members, or is there some challenge that will prevent that from happening? I think that's a key question that all of us need to think about as part of this discussion for the RO. How can we efficiently organize to be sure that the leads are advocating for the entire group? And is there going to be enough of a common interest so that that will be the key thing to get all of those voices heard? Back to Kathleen's point that, again, keep in mind, individual companies will continue to advocate. That is really going to be the main way things will be done. But can you aggregate these things together efficiently to be sure that the voices are competently respected and heard for the key policy inputs? That's, I think, a great conversation to continue to have. All right, enough rambling. Josh, please, what did I miss?
Yeah, no, that was great, Scott. Very well covered in terms of the way in which the RIF operates today. Maybe a couple different add-on thoughts here, right? So in terms of the issue associated with time and commitment, it certainly is an element associated with what you're looking to get out of it, right? You can be I would say from a leadership perspective within the RIF, chair, co-chair position, right? It is a lot of work, but at the same time, it's a lot of work associated based on the idea of what you're ultimately looking to get out of the experience. My experience is the last year's, or maybe let's call it the 2023 chair of the RIF was transitional, right? So we were working through implementing some changes that were recommended and approved through the GRC, through the Governance Review Committee. So we were transitioning the RIF from a more educational body into a body that has a stronger ability to influence our decision makers, the governing body. So, you know, with that, working through the institutional change was an important aspect associated with how you ultimately work through and make the RIF or a RIF-like body more effective as a stakeholder advocacy group. So again, I think that as the model for the SRC, and also making sure that we have sector representation done right are important aspects of making the SRC as effective as possible. You know, we do see differences in opinions on with the different sectors as they're represented today. And we also internal to sectors, specifically EIM sector, but can see as the market evolves, representation in the EDEM sector. You know, the idea of you know, the positions of market participants are different. And I think that it's important that we recognize that. I think it's important that we recognize, as mentioned before, the geographic diversity and the diversity in ownership structures that we have in the West. So I do think that the key element, and I think the main reason why we are here today with this TAC-on meeting, is to outline and recognize that there are certain differences that, you know, that we have historically managed through and dealt with the RIF, and hope that we're able to recognize that as we use the RIF as a tool in building out the SRC.
Thanks, Josh. Michael.
So I don't get off mute fast enough. I think just a question, and I truly just can't remember this. In other forums that we've participated in, nonprofits, consumer advocates, other kind of advisory bodies that don't have a commercial interest, there is, you know, not necessarily a payment for time, but there is sort of an honorarium to just help cover travel costs and other things. And I don't know if that is contemplated for the SRC for the non-market participants. I'm thinking specifically about consumer advocates and about the statutory obligation and about public interest organizations who do not have a commercial size wallet. And I don't know if there is any thinking about having the tariff cover some sort of just travel costs and other things when they arise. And I know, Kathleen, what you said at the beginning about trying to do things online and Zoom to try and minimize any of those expenditures, but wasn't sure if there was anything that was contemplated in this document for that.
We have not.
Thanks for the
go ahead, Pam.
question, Michael. So we have separately identified the separate organization for the consumer advocates to facilitate their participation. And I think through that organization, it would be up to that organization's determination around how they will support consumer advocate engagement into the SRC. But we are not aware of any organized market that provides intervener funding. So a lot of that does occur at the state level and is up to a state decision, but that is not contemplated in this structure.
Okay, thanks.
Jay.
Thank you. I want to go back to what Josh was bringing up. And thanks to Josh and before that, even Jonathan, trying to explain the RIF and all that. I thought I want to clarify something here with the question. And I think Pam had addressed this question that I raised last week on Friday, was that we are moving on into a new world, in a new paradigm called the RO, where we are not taking votes at the policy determination stage. We're creating a SRC that is reflective of the people who bring the appropriate input and perspectives. If we're going to go back into the RIF world of thinking, then we have to slice and dice everything again. If is this, I'm curious, where is this coming from? Is this a fear that some subsector is not going to have a voice? You'll have plenty of voices, and those who actually buy and sell energy or have market interests are also subject matter experts. So I'm trying to understand what is the maybe I missed it again. I had to take a quick call for 2 minutes on the side, but what is the problem we are struggling with here, in the sense that that we have to riff is a tool as a basis of brainstorming an example, but we're not bringing exact riff back in here. I thought that's what I heard on Friday. So I want to be mindful and careful how we are leaning on the riff structure and format, and for what end goal, when the end goal here is the RO framework. Thank you.
Thanks, Vijay. I hope others will respond to his comments and really help us understand some of the points that Vijay was articulating around where are the exact points of engagement. So hope to hear from others. I do see that Colin Smith has put a question in the chat. Since this proposal envisions individual organizations playing a major advocacy role, am I correct in assuming that proposals to the policy catalog will be submitted by individual organizations rather than sectors? We envision the policy catalog process as very open. So proposals could come from individuals, from sectors, from state representatives to the bosser or other state representatives, from Department of Market Monitoring. So we really envision that catalog can be populated from a real diversity of perspectives, and there would not be any limitations on nominating an issue for consideration in that catalog. The process of prioritization would come through the sectors, but that individual engagement on recommending an initiative or an idea to be included in that catalog could come from any diversity of sources. And with that, I think John is our next individual in the queue.
Good morning. This is John Rumble from Southern California Edison, and I really appreciate all of the conversation that's occurring this morning. I am a very new member of the RIF, and certainly the least experienced. It's been a positive experience to date. And I'm looking forward to, continuing to participate. Where I have hesitation, I think some of us here at Edison have some hesitation, is that the SRC as contemplated is described as being sort of the primary body responsible for overseeing and guiding the development of new initiatives, and not necessarily what the role is in the roadmap process, in the prioritization process, but the downstream responsibilities of defining problem statements and developing solutions. That is a new role, I would argue, for this body. A certainly evolved role from the RIF, where today it seems as though it's really interested stakeholders, interested parties who are working closely in specific initiatives with CAISO staff in developing problem statements and working through the solutions. Here, this is contemplating a formal role of the SRC in that solutioning process. And I think that well, I appreciate sort of folks saying, hey, you get out of it what you put into it, and making it sort of seem as though it's, this is a volunteer, sort of role. The issue is that now it's a really important role in, beyond just representing your sector. It's moving initiatives forward in a way that does not necessarily need to occur today. And I think that's where there's a little bit of some concern on our part, that when we talk about, hey, do you have enough time to do this? What's happening in your day job? You know, a volunteer who gets busy somewhere else, we don't want to gum up initiatives moving forward because, you know, the SRC just doesn't have the capacity, resources to, you know, perform the specific role. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Mary.
Hi, thank you. Mary Winky again from the Public Generating Pool. And I think I did, just listening to this discussion, wanted to maybe amend or add on to the comment I made before about kind of you get from it what you put into it. Because I appreciate your response to that, Pam. And I also appreciate John's comments there. I do think that there is also kind of a minimum commitment level, right? That if you're signing up, you are committing to a particular role, and that role is important, and sort of unplugging or checking out because you've gotten distracted by other things, you know, relative to that kind of core responsibility or core role, I do think is important. So I still do think that on many individual topics and priorities, there is a level of sort of, and also I would say sort of the phone calling and the sort of time it takes to really coordinate with individuals and really do that kind of legwork. You know, there is kind of a above and beyond maybe role there too, when I'm thinking through sort of getting out of it what you put into it. But I do really agree with John that this is a more substantive participatory role, and that does come with a level of commitment to kind of perform the minimum set of expectations. So I kind of wanted to amend or append the earlier comments that I made. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary. Catherine.
Hi, I'm wondering if the launch committee has considered, you know, providing stakeholders with more time to draft comments, just because if, you know, if this kind of collaboration is expected to happen, I'm wondering, you know, just for myself, you know, whenever we submit comments, you know, it has to go through, you know, probably more rounds of review than private companies. So I'm just wondering if, you know, additional time is going to be built into the process anywhere to allow for this kind of collaboration.
Catherine, do you mean for,
Catherine,
I just wanted to make sure I understand the question correctly. Are you talking about this, like our current comment period, or are you talking about in the stakeholder process that we're proposing?
In the future stakeholder process.
Gotcha. Go ahead, Pam, sorry.
that is, I think, an implementation detail that will be up to the regional organization and its board and staff and the needs of each particular initiative. It's not something I think the launch committee is prepared to provide guidance on due to the kind of the individual nature of each stakeholder process, and whether it is more complex or that might require more time, or something that's more straightforward that would be able to be achieved more quickly, but that would be an implementation detail that would be outside the scope of the launch committee's recommendations.
Okay, thank you.
Elaine.
Yeah, going back to commitment level, the PIOs had a long discussion about this because, you know, we traditionally aren't super resourced, and we have to spread ourselves fairly thin, which is not specific to just PIOs. But we also wanted to be mindful of the fact that we wanted the SRC to also be manageable and efficient. So as we thought through how many representatives we would need on there to be effectively engaged, we've asked for one, and we can do that because we also were one of the groups that suggested having an alternate. which is in the proposal, and we're very appreciative of that because that is going to help us be more effective, be more engaged, be there when we need to be, but also keep our ask and the manageable level, because we're part of a collective and we collectively would like to see this governance structure work, and that this committee needs to be, again, manageable and efficient. It was also important to us in terms of how many representatives we were asking for, that this committee is not voting, meaning that these votes as a committee are not the indicative votes for whether proposals are being, what groups think about proposals. Those votes are at the stakeholder level, as everybody said. So whether we ask for 2, 3, or 5 representatives, it will not increase our voice in the voting process at all, or our weight in the voting process. And that was also important to us. So I wanted to express our appreciation for having the alternate in there, because that was important to us.
Thanks, Elaine. I wonder, before we move on, and we're going to talk next, I think, about the goals of the SRC, and the I did want to make sure that we heard Lauren. I'm going to pick on you for a minute. We've heard a lot of the RIF perspectives, and I wanted to make sure that we were providing some perspective about other stakeholder processes, because this is not just a RIF. This is different from the RIF, and I think very intentionally so. So Lauren, I'd love to get your perspective on this as well.
Yeah, sure. I was asked to share some perspectives from participating in Markets Plus, and I see that there's other folks on the call that have participated in that process as well. So we'll definitely welcome some additions, but some initial thoughts. The structure in Markets Plus is just quite different in that there is there's layers of these stakeholder groups. So there is the Markets Plus executive or participant executive committee, and that includes representatives from each individual organization that is either a planned participant of the market or a stakeholder in the market that has gone through that process to be recognized as a stakeholder. Then there's the next layer down, which is the workforce, the work groups and task forces that are actually working on developing the individual issues with the market operator staff. So there's the MPEC is providing guidance to the work group and voting on proposals that come out of those work groups and task forces. But the work group and task force structure is really where the participant process and that stakeholder process is occurring. And I think that the proposal that the Pathways Launch Committee put forward is allowed for use of those groups. And I think one of the benefits that comes out of having an individual task force or work group is that you can have folks self-select more into the areas of or topics that they are most interested in. In Markets Plus, the sector definitions are, from my perspective, used more to make sure that there's an equal weighting of different types of views. There's only 3 sectors identified: a COU sector, an IOU sector, and then an other sector that includes various voices, public interest organizations, IPPs, and then there's been a lot of discussion about whether that sector needs some additional refinement or addition just because it's such a big group. But largely what the sectors have been used for, again, in my perspective from Markets Plus, is making sure that there's a balance of voices. It is used in weighting the voting that comes out of that MPEC executive committee. And then it's used loosely to identify that you have roughly an equal number of representatives on each of these work groups and task forces from the different sectors. And so I think there's quite a bit of difference in the way that in either the RIF or under the SRC, where there's more representation of the sector. In Markets Plus, the sectors are providing guidance and providing balance, but there's more individual representation on those work groups and then of the MPEC. And I see that there's a hand that's gone up, so I'll pause there.
Thanks, Lauren. Ryan?
Yeah, this is Ryan Millard from NextEra Energy Resources. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Just a general question. One of the things, and again, this is an opinion, one of the things that I've found lacking over the years with the existing RIF structures that CAISO's obligation to adopt a particular proposal path or priority topic is a little ambiguous. CAISO still retains a lot of autonomy on that front. So is the thought process here that increasing the role of the SRC would help increase RO staff accountability on a topic that stakeholders are prioritizing through their sectors? And I guess, if so, how will that occur if the SRC is not decisional? I see John Rumble's point in there, and I have kind of the same thought process. I'm just kind of curious.
Thanks. I think John, Ryan, your question and John's question are really similar. The idea here is that by providing that additional transparency and organization at the SRC level, and the commitment for direct engagement of policy staff with the SRC, that there's a clearer line of sight into stakeholder perspective that allows for a deeper engagement and incorporation of those sector perspectives into the market design. That the avenue of kind of just charging forward or moving forward without getting that sector engagement that sector engagement will happen on an ongoing basis, so that that perspective does get incorporated, and there's the transparency around where each sector is and where the sector members are through the voting process, and the transparency of the voting process gives the RO board more of an insight into the specific sector perspectives on an initiative, to ensure that before it becomes a decisional item, that those concerns are addressed to the extent possible.
And I'll add to that too. I think this exact question was one that we grappled with as we developed the remand process. This was something that we wanted to incorporate, that remand for additional stakeholdering, because we wanted to ensure that the stakeholder perspective was something that is that staff and the board are very much taking into account, and that this is that there's some that this is not just purely advisory, but it's not decisional. It's like advisory plus. So I think trying to grapple with that balance, which was why we added in some of the voting as well as this remand process. So trying to I think strengthen the value that is placed upon the stakeholder input throughout this process.
Thank you.
Any other Markets Plus or RAP or any other perspectives that people want to share at this point?
Kathleen, I might just add one general thought from both being involved in the Markets Plus process and being on the RIF. I think the more that we are able to develop these processes where there's incentives for stakeholders to talk to each other and not just to the market operator, there's really that incentive to collaborate, be creative and problem solving, and a lot of benefits out of that. So I just wanted to highlight that piece too.
Thanks, Lauren. Vijay.
Vijay with WRA. I actually agree with Lauren in a different way, in that and I've been very involved in the Markets Plus with the MPEG, the MDWG. But let's also not forget some things here, that every improvement by one initiative often looks at the past. As the SPP Markets Plus initiative got going, it did employ the task force and work group logic below the MDWG, which is decisional. That was an indicative voting to some degree, but the task force, like Mary Winke leads one, has done a lot of hard work in that area, is emulative or similar to the work group approach that CalISO EDAM did take on. And in the CalISO EDAM approach, we should not forget that the staff did reach out to all the market participants and asked in helping design the scope of the document. So there was an equal democratic voice in the shaping of the market proposal or the tariff design and the contents in at least 3 of the items that I am aware of. So if we're going to start comparing apples and apples from Michigan and Wisconsin or Minnesota, you're always going to have different flavors. The key is, are we getting representation at the right place? Are we not getting stuck in vote counting? So then we have to increase the number of people in each sector. And as long as there is fair representation and debate and dialogue, yes, but market operators should equally have a voice, because after all, they have to run the market. So I just want to put that out there, and let's not forget that there are actually a little more layers now of decision making and approvals in SPP markets, plus that I'm a little concerned about. So I just want to throw that out there too. Thank you.
Thanks, Vijay. Sam.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
I just wanted to maybe re-emphasize the points about how important it is that the SRC actions actually matter to the board and to the RO staff. And I also want to tie it to that whole discussion, which was great, about, putting in the time, and it is a time commitment, and facilitating collaboration, and just tie those two ideas together. To convince an SRC and a broader stakeholder community to really engage with each other is hard, and that will only happen if the results of that engagement matter to the end results. And so it doesn't take a whole lot of, hey, we tried really hard on this, and it just splatted on the ground once it got to the RO board, before people just stop engaging, and it's a spiral downward of engagement. So if we want this SRC process to be successful, we have to tie it to meaningful results at the RO board and staff level. So I don't think I'm disagreeing with anybody here. I'm just tying the two ideas together about how important they are.
Thanks, Sam.
Thanks.
Yeah, that's right. We've had several of those conversations as well. I think this is we have talked a lot about the whole sewing kit of needles we've been trying to thread in this process. And I think your point is a really important one.
Can I offer one more, just a question? I guess I didn't see it, but one way to do that is to make it, the RO board can retain ultimate decision-making power and independence, but there are more subtle ways to make going against what the SRC is recommending more difficult. Something like a higher percentage voting requirement if you're going to not adopt something the SRC recommended. A requirement to not go on the consent agenda at the RO board level. There's a whole menu of options there. We just have, a super majority standard instead of a simple majority. And I'm curious if people have thought through some of those options, which you could write right into the bylaws at this stage.
So I think we have touched on some of those topics in some of our discussions. We have not gotten quite that granular yet in our recommendation, and I think there's a lot of work still to be done as we get to the implementation phase of this stakeholder process. So first off, I would recommend please put these in your comments. And I think secondly, as we get to this point over the coming year where we really are trying to figure out how do we get this thing off the ground, how do we, how's the RO taking this and building it, and the transition from the wrap and all of these different pieces that are going to go into that. I think there's going to be a lot more opportunities for us to continue to evaluate those kinds of thresholds and tools to get exactly to the goal that you were articulating. So I think those ideas are really important as we continue to move forward. We're not going to, I think that we're not going to implement this thing, this November. And even as the recommendation that we put forward as the launch committee in November, things will continue to evolve as we get to this point where the rubber hits the road and we're trying to create something. I think, we've talked in many ways, we're recommending something sort of in a vacuum. And until we actually get people participating and working on this, that's when we're going to start to know exactly what we need to achieve all the goals that we're setting out. So thank you.
Thanks.
And I think with that, I think it probably makes sense to get to the next, we want to talk about some of these goals of the Stakeholder Representative Committee. And these are the goals really that we are, that the work group and the launch committee are going to be considering as we're developing another proposal for sectors. So with these goals in mind, this is how we're going to take the input that we're hearing today and come up with our next iteration of sector representatives for the SRC. And I know Neha has we're going to take a minute after we get through this too and get additional feedback from folks through some questions and polling. But at this point, what we've kind of talked about, and you've heard this in some of the comments so far, we want the SRC to foster collaboration, a diversity of opinion ideas, an accessible and efficient process that organizations can effectively participate in, thorough and diverse input into the critical processes for the RO, and a manageable and balanced structure. So these are the kinds of, these are the overarching goals that we are trying to achieve as we're identifying what the SRC should be and who should be, what those sectors are that make up the SRC. Pam, did you want to add anything to this at this point?
I think you've covered this section sufficiently.
Awesome. Then maybe with that, Neha, I'll pass it back to you.
Yeah, thanks, Kathleen. Before I move to our first poll, just want to note that Vijay has a comment in the chat. If Kathleen or Pam, you could address it. Wish to ensure that we get clarity that we've referred to the RIF structure as a resource on how issues are discussed and caucused within our sectors, but the RO is a new world of engagement. We're not bringing the exact RIF into the RO framework.
Vijay, I think that is the right observation and the right way to think about this. The SRC is much more focused on the policy development process itself, where the Regional Issues Forum also has a strong element of stakeholder education. A lot of those elements will hopefully be moving to the Office of Public Participation that will be staffed by the RO. Which should hopefully allow the SRC to focus on that policy process and stakeholder engagement components, but that there will need to be a very careful and deliberate process to ensure that as this organization transitions into something new, that a lot of the value that the Regional Issues Forum has built over the last decade won't be lost. So we are thinking about that deliberately. Appreciate your comments from your experience on how to make that transition work well. And if we have found the right landing places in our overall proposal to ensure that those value components continue to be captured. And I also see John has added another comment that says, are critical processes about market design or market operations or both? We see these as a market design component. The business practice manual is more driving market operations. And so I think this is really focused on the policy process, but I hope a lot of these components also carry into more of an engagement around the business practice manuals as well.
Thanks, Pam, for addressing both of those. Sarah, could we go to the next slide? All right, so recognizing that the SRC proposal is not final, that you all will still have an opportunity to provide your written comments on it, and that we've obviously gotten a lot of comments here today. I do sort of just want to do a temperature check of the room, because this is sort of understanding the SRC as it's intended to function is sort of foundational to our sector conversation. And so Sarah, Serena, if you could launch our Zoom poll. So we're just on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being disagree, 5 agree. I understand how the SRC is intended to work. And that's the SRC proposal as it stands today. Not if you like it or not, but if you would understand how it's intended to work. And we'd really appreciate, I think we have 111 people in the room. please participate in the poll if you can. We really want to make sure that we can have a solid base of understanding before we move into the next part of our discussion. Okay, I had 47 responses, then I had 46. Don't know how Zoom works. Cool. And then I'm not totally sure that I see the same thing that everyone else sees. So I'm seeing responses slow down. We have about 50% of folks in the room who've responded. I see a lot of 4s and 5s, and a handful of 1s, 2s, and 3s. For folks who responded 1, 2, or 3, are there any specific questions you have in this moment that might help you to better understand the intention of the SRC or how it's intended to work? If so, I invite you to either put those questions in the chat or come off of mute. I think we can go ahead and wrap the poll. I had 8 people who disagreed or sort of on the more towards the disagree end of things. If you have additional questions, this is sort of your time to ask them. Obviously, you'll have an opportunity to provide comments, written comments. But if you have questions, this is the time to get your questions answered. Okay. Feel free to pop your questions in the chat as they come to you. But seeing that at the moment and seeing that we have general understanding, I'm going to move us to our next poll. Okay, so this maybe gets at, okay, you understand how the SRC is intended to work, but are you comfortable with how it's intended to work? So again, here, a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being, no, I'm not comfortable with how the SRC is intended to work. And yes, I am comfortable with it. All right, seeing participation slow down, really invite folks to indicate something on here. I've got 40 out of 107 possible respondents, so waiting for a few more folks before we share the poll results. All right, I think we're got about half of folks responding. So Serena, if you could share these results with the room. Great, so we have a lot of folks on the 4 and 5 end of the spectrum, which is nice to see, although we do have some folks in the 1, 2, and 3 ranking as well. And as a reminder, you will have an opportunity to share your comments about this in a written form. And it's also, I'm hoping that as we get into our sector discussion in the latter half of our workshop, that maybe some of that discomfort might be resolved through that conversation. So I have one more poll for y'all. Can we move to the next slide on the next poll? This is the list of goals that Kathleen just articulated, goals of the SRC and goals of the representation within the SRC. I'm curious to hear which of these goals is resonating with you. And you can choose, I believe, as many of these as you want. And then also curious if you see that there's anything missing. And if you see anything missing, feel free to pop those in the chat, or if you'd like to raise your hand and share a little bit live with the group. Ryan, I see your hand raised.
Sure, just a thought on, first, I support all these goals and I think they're a great combination. One thing that I'd note that might be missing is support for minority views or new views. I think that diversity of opinion and ideas is fine and good goal, but unless that diversity is actively supported, it may not just organically arise and be effective unless there's support for more minority or new views. And one other way of putting that is that the capacity to participate can be a barrier to entry to a number of other potential participants. And so that we should be cognizant of that and not try to make it try to make sure that it is not a barrier to entry, that two voices that should be there to provide that diversity of opinion and ideas. So support for minority and new voices, I think, is a short way of expressing that.
Great, thanks, Brian. All right, I see responses on our poll slowing down. We can share the results. So broad support for each of the goals here. I think, yeah, the big one, accessible and efficient process that organizations can effectively participate in. I think this is something we've heard echoed in previous workshops as well. Yeah, and we can consider whether or not support for new or minority voices should be added explicitly. Kathleen, Pam, anything you'd like to say in response to either Brian's comment or in response to what you see here as what feels important to people?
I do appreciate Brian highlighting that minority perspective. I think one of the goals of having diverse sectors and a diversity of SRC representatives within the sector is to ensure that those minority perspectives are identified and carried forward. We see a lot of opportunity in diverse sectors with transparency into any divergences within the sector as really being an opportunity to ensure that minority viewpoints are carried forward and not washed through just an overall bucket of information. I do also see here that an accessible and efficient process is important. I think one of the things that we're hearing from the participants today who shared their own experience with a diversity of stakeholder engagement opportunities is that the efficiency and the time commitment are both really important components in ensuring that stakeholders are able to effectively staff the organization, and that has to be balanced by the number and diversity of sectors so that representation can get appropriately allocated and provided without overburdening any one individual or small group of individuals. So really appreciate the perspectives that we've heard today and the input from this poll that I think confirms and reinforces a lot of the voices that we've heard so far on this call.
Thanks, Pam. All right, I'm gonna play a little fast and loose with our agenda, recognizing that we are just about at 10:30, so about an hour and a half in. We're a little bit behind, but that's totally okay. We're having the conversations that we need. I'm gonna suggest that we go ahead and take our break before diving into sectors in a big way. So it's 10:26 where I am right now, so 11:26 or 12:26 where you are. If we can come back in 10 minutes at oh gosh, math, at 06 or 36. 36, that's an easy math, plus 10. 10:36, 11:36, or 12:36, and we'll get into the latter part of our agenda. Thank you, Serena. 36 minutes past the hour. That is what I was trying to say. All right, welcome back, folks. We are at 36. So we're going to go ahead and dive into the second half of our workshop today. So spent our first hour and a half talking about the Stakeholder Representatives Committee. And obviously, there's what the Stakeholder Representatives Committee is intended to do. And then there is who is on the Stakeholder Representatives Committee, which is the sector proposals. So wanted to just start off this section of our workshop by reviewing some of the feedback that was received on the sector proposal in the discussion document. And then obviously looking to today to get further input and feedback, but just to set us up with what we've heard already. So several parties suggested that we further refine or define the sector membership. Many of the commenters were focused on the transmission dependent utility sectors, and some commenters also suggested using sector compositions or sector definitions as used in other bodies, such as the RAP nominating committee. A number of requests to add seats to the SRC or create new sectors. This is a sampling that we got. Folks wanted additional seats or sectors for consumer advocates, DER entities, PMAs, public marketing agencies, consumer-owned utilities, and neighboring balancing authorities. Concerns about sector balance between sellers and buyers. Some support for distinguishing between consumer-owned and investor-owned utilities. Perhaps adding a second seat to the EDAM sector to cover consumer-owned utilities. Next slide, please. Number of comments about the need to define the role of the CAISO, both as a balancing authority as well as the market operator. Thank you for the correction, PMA's Power Marketing Administration. Totally butchered that. Sectors should also have the discretion to organize themselves, but some elements may benefit from consistency, such as how they develop consensus and conduct votes and how they communicate positions to the RO. And then finally, commenters noted the balance between using sectors to create a reasonably representative stakeholder committee that promotes collaboration and compromise, while still allowing individual entities to participate directly through opportunities such as voting, comments, and working groups. So I ran through that pretty quickly, and we can certainly pop back to the first slide. Apologies that I couldn't get this all on one. I'm curious if there are any themes that folks feel are missing that they had already shared in their comments on the discussion document. Yeah, Patrick.
Hi, Patrick Huber for the California Public Advocates Office. Cal Advocates brought up astroturfing and suggestions for addressing that. And that's something we'd like to make sure is on the forefront of your mind today.
Thanks, Patrick, for sorry, go ahead.
Patrick, I'm not familiar with the term astroturfing. Can you please illuminate what that means?
Yes, I can. So in our September 11th comment letter, we actually included a definition of it. And Merriam-Webster defines it as organized activity that is intended to create a false impression of a widespread, spontaneously arising grassroots movement in support of or in opposition to something, but that is in reality initiated or controlled by a concealed group. It's a mouthful.
Thanks, Patrick, for sharing that and for sharing the definition for the rest of us. And Michael, your comment in the chat is helpful as well. Basically, astroturfing would be instead of a grassroots campaign, or maybe a false grassroots campaign.
And I think the other piece, sorry, real quickly, I think, Patrick, one of the other areas that I think we got from your comments as well was sector shopping, and as another sort of flag for as we're thinking about how we put these things together, putting some thought into how we prevent that as well. So I think this is, so appreciate that you flagged that, because I don't think those are captured quite well enough in here. But I think are very important aspects as we're thinking about how we're creating these sectors. You know, I think the number of sectors could potentially make it harder. If you've got a fewer number of sectors, it's harder to sector shop. So I think those are things that we have to consider as we're going into this. So appreciate the comment.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kathleen. Thanks, Patrick. Any other themes folks feel are missing from this summary of feedback that we've already received, and recognizing this is not the last opportunity to provide comments on sectors today? Yeah, Sam.
I'm curious if we put in some comments about, for example, the reband process and how that relates. Is that appropriate for this section of the discussion, or should we have done it already, or it's coming up?
We can talk about it now. Is maybe you can share a little more detail. Is it a question or a comment? I think there's like certainly a relationship between sectors and voting. Are you looking for clarification on that?
It's more, you know, the three classifications of proposal and how they're defined, and then under what circumstances, you know, how many sectors it takes to remand a proposal, for example. Is that appropriate for this section?
Sure. Yeah, I think we're just looking where our goal here is to make sure we're all on the same page about what is on the table as being proposed already, so that we can have a baseline going into our discussion. So yeah, if you have a specific question, or if Kathleen or Pam, you just want to share a little bit more about how the remand process relates to number of sectors.
You're gonna make me go back to the proposal. Hang on one second here. I can't remember all the details.
I mean, I think while Kathleen's looking at the details, I might add that overall there's this balance here, right? Where the more sectors that we have, the more we have to get the number of sectors and the thresholds needed to remand an initiative have to come to the right balance. If we have a number of sectors that represent small components of the market footprint, we might have to revisit exactly what that remand looks like. And so I think that the goal here is to really understand if there's value in having individual sectors that represent very specific areas of the stakeholder community, or where we would need to see more of a different metric potentially for remand versus of diverse, larger, more diverse sectors with maybe that individual representation or voice coming from an additional SRC representative within a sector. And so just how to get that balance right, I think, is really important, and what we're seeking that feedback from all of you here today. I think that's really where this conversation needs to explore. And so I think that's really where the levers are, and how we need to work through those in order to get the balance right.
Yeah, fair enough. It's certainly a balance. I would just say maybe lumping together remand and kind of the fast track process together. You know, we're concerned as consumers, one, about being really specific about when you can fast track a proposal, and being really narrow with that and well defined, and things that are subjective. It's not, you know, a FERC order compliance, but something, you know, the word important or something is subjective. We need to be really careful about fast tracking something like that. And then the other thing we're really concerned about is, you know, there are proposals that can devastate a single sector that maybe nobody else cares about. And that sector needs a voice to say, hey, wait a second, we need to rethink this. And maybe ultimately they get over, voted, but they need a voice, and it can't just be a run over. So those are our kind of general concerns about remand and fast track.
That's really helpful, Sam. I think again, going back to our original diagram, where we continue to emphasize that advocacy continues at the individual level. And so those impactful areas that even sometimes an initiative can impact a single company or a single market participant very differently than a number of other market participants. And that needs to be considered. And so we continue to believe that individual advocacy remains an important and probably the primary component of engagement with the stakeholder process, and with advocacy to the RO board around how that process needs to change in order to ensure that the potential consequences of a policy initiative are not overly burdensome to any one sector or even participant. So I think that it's really finding that balance, and I appreciate your comments around how we can consider the different types of levers that we have in terms of weight to provide some of that balance. We want to find a way that makes sector participation and the voting meaningful without having that kind of minority opinion be lost in the shuffle. And so I think that is part of the role of the RO board, and in terms of the transparency and the multiple tabulation that we're proposing as part of the voting structure, so that even if there seems to be broad support for an initiative, if there is regional disagreement or a subsector that disagrees, that is clear to the board, so that the board can make an informed decision. And that's why we value the added layers and transparency there, and also why independent boards are available to make independent decisions with the input of individual members of the stakeholder community. I also note that we have a question from Mike Florio in the chat, which is, are there fault lines within the launch committee between distinct options? In other words, is there a key question that needs to be resolved? And Mike, I would say that this workshop is in response to the feedback that we received from stakeholders, and where we saw a number of unresolved issues around divergent sector opinions or stakeholder opinions. I don't think there are necessarily fault lines anywhere, but that we just really needed to spend more time to discuss these perspectives so that we can find the right balance around the questions that we're illuminating here today. I think this dialogue is representative, is exactly why we are here, and not that there is a fault line in the process, but that we need to really better understand sector or stakeholder perspectives on the balance between more smaller sectors with more distinct membership versus larger sectors that have that more diverse membership, and maybe more the weighting between these two pieces in terms of how we would get to sector voting and meaningful engagement with the process.
If I might jump in just to close the loop real quickly, Sam, on your questions too. So we have in this proposal both an automatic remand and an elective remand. And the automatic remand is triggered by 1/3 of sectors at a 70% or more opposed, which refers to the underlying votes within the sector. And the second is a lack of consensus. So a simple majority of sectors opposes. So those are the two criteria for significant opposition, either one of which could trigger an automatic remand. In the elective remand, I think the question that you asked and what the way Pam described it was exactly what we're trying to get to. So if you've got the language in here, you know, if the RO board, where am I here? The RO board could override the stakeholder majority opinion if the RO board decides that such a proposal should move forward nonetheless. Such an override, oh, sorry, wrong section, sorry. One rationale for an elective remand, for example, could be that while a majority of sectors supports a proposal, entities that identify with a particular geographic region indicate deep opposition, suggesting a potential acute impact in that region. And I think that's just an illustrative example for you, if there is one sector that is wholly opposed to something, I think those are flags that that we are intending to bring to light. I mean, another part of this too is that all of the voting data and the way we're tracking it is going to be public. So everyone can see where these sectors lie. It's not just like the closed envelope that goes to the board or anything like that. So I think if we're taking votes and one sector is opposed to something, everybody's going to know that. And so this is, there's a certain amount of public pressure that comes with part of this as well. So I think this is again things that we're trying to keep in our heads as we're moving forward.
Thank you for that. Just maybe one request or suggestion is that we continue to explore. I think that the hope is that we all, minority views are respected by the board and it's collaborative and all that stuff. But to the extent we can at this stage, create a structure that facilitates that. That's in many ways our job here. So for example, in other ISOs, if you get beat in the stakeholder process and you're unhappy about it, there's a explicit opportunity to address the board directly about it, as an example. But I would just encourage us to explore ways, even if it's not, hey, a full remand or you get your way, but a way to ensure your voice is heard and you have that opportunity. Thanks.
Thanks, Sam.
Sam, I do think that direct addressing of the board is something that we continue to, regardless of the sector breakdown or voting or remand process. That is, I think, a core value of our recommendation in the Pathways Initiative, is that there continues to be the opportunity for direct engagement with the board. And that is at the individual level and not at the sector level.
Thanks, Sam, for the question, and Kathleen and Pam for your clarifications. Sybil, did you have a comment to share about themes that you felt were missing from our summary of the sector feedback?
Yeah, and just relating to some of what Sam was just saying, in terms of helping to document minority opinions, and then also from an efficiency perspective, one benefit that we've really found in participating in the Markets Plus process is the concept of the parking lot. And so it's a way to document sort of outstanding items or next steps on a particular initiative that maybe had to be set aside as out of scope to be able to proceed on making progress on the policy, but recognizing that there's something that some subset of stakeholders wanted to come back and revisit or needed further analysis. And one mechanism that we thought might be a way to help not only efficiently capture some of this outstanding concerns for stakeholders or minority opinions would be maybe having more of the scaled voting approach that the CAISO had introduced on some policy initiatives previously, where you have support with caveats or oppose with caveats, as well as just support or oppose, so that it prompts stakeholders to clearly articulate what those outstanding concerns may be, i.e., I support this, but I do still have this outstanding topic that I'm hoping we don't forget about, or oppose this, but hey, if this one little thing was addressed, it would help alleviate the concerns from the sector. We were thinking that may help the SRC representatives to help interpret it, kind of where their sector is at on a particular issue. It would make the summarizing of the votes more complex, so recognizing that there's a trade-off there. One other piece in terms of the voting is that it seems like you yes, this is going to be resource intensive, and we're wanting people to be able to engage on issues that are most important for their sector or organization. And I think you also have to clearly enable participants to sort of signal disengagement, or that this doesn't impact me, and there's not a negative connotation with that. So the idea that it's okay to just abstain from a vote, saying this one's just not of interest to us, it doesn't impact us, and making that a norm that you don't have to support or oppose. It's clear that it's okay to just abstain, and that doesn't have any, it's just saying this isn't one that we care about, and that's okay. We don't want our opinion to be included in the overarching decision process on this. So those are just some ideas we've been brainstorming. Thanks.
Thanks, Sybil. And I see a comment in the chat regarding appeal process in a situation where the board overrides either an automatic or elective remand. I do want to just like take a pause and note that our intention today is not to focus too much on the voting process. Certainly, like, there is relevancy to how the sector definitions happen, but that if possible, if your comments or questions about voting are not directly related to sectors, that you keep those questions and comments for your written comments on the step 2 proposal. So, or you can continue to document in the chat, but I'm not going to bring them into the live discussion because I do want to make sure that we have an opportunity to do our sector discussion today. But thank you, Sybil, and thank you, Sam, for bringing those up, because certainly voting is a whole part of this package. With that, I'm going to turn things over to Kathleen or Pam just to level set us in, you know, the discussion document sector proposal as it compares to some other examples across RTOs and ISOs in the country.
Thanks, Neha. Pam, do you want to jump in? You want me to take it?
So maybe I'll go ahead and start. So we brought here today some comparisons between some of the different structures and definitions across a number of different markets, and those including those in the West. So we have on the left our discussion document that includes EDAM entities and EIM entities and all those sectors that you can read here. We then have the CAISO Regional Issues Forum, which is a subset of the sectors in the discussion document. Looking over to SPP, this is their organized market, the SPP Classic, with IPPs, transmission companies, IOUs, Fed agencies, marketers, co-op communities, state agencies, and contract participants. We also have RAP here, as well as MISO. And so again, I'm not going to read aloud all of these different sectors, but this, I think, it helps frame some of the diversity of approaches that you can take to sector engagement. And I do want to delineate a couple things. So for the current CAISO RIF and in our discussion document, one of the main differences is that we are framing sectors based on participation type. So EDAM entities, EIM entities, and ISO PTOs are all based on the type of service that the organization is taking from the California ISO. And I think these three sectors all represent balancing authorities with vertically integrated utilities, or more or less, but really are based on the kind of the contract relationship that the entity has with the CAISO or the regional organization. And one of the reasons that so maybe I'll share some personal framing for this, is that as we started building these sectors for the Regional Issues Forum, So these sectors include both investor-owned utilities and consumer-owned utilities and power marketing agencies. So PGE is an EIM entity, Bonneville Power is an EIM entity, Seattle City Light, NV Energy, there is a Salt River project. All of these organizations are EIM entities and are potentially eligible to be EDAM entities. And one of the things that at least I found really valuable about being in a sector that includes both IOUs and public power balancing authorities is that we really found a lot of consensus between our organizations, regardless of what our corporate structure or business model really is. That we have a lot of commonality based on our role in the market, and that it's a really important component to building consensus around an initiative or around a position or a challenge in the market. And I know that I myself have found a lot of value in the broader perspective of a role-based sector instead of a business model-based sector. I know many of my POU colleagues have also felt similarly and have become some of our closest consensus building partners in the regional process. That is not to say that a more business model type approach could be appropriate here, but just wanted to really highlight that for these categories, especially these categories up at the top of this list, that these represent both investor-owned utilities and public power agencies. Again, I think beyond that, there's a lot of balance in all of these different organizations around how to get the public interest representation correct. How do public interest organizations and retail consumer advocates are sometimes in the same sector, sometimes in different sectors, or sometimes are not represented at all. And so I think we're trying to find how to get that the balance right between how to pull these types of organizations forward, and really based on the engagement at the RO level, how do we find those opportunities to build consensus among sectors, and where does working together or working within a sector provide those kinds of alignment and learning opportunities and benefits, where there is enough commonality to drive engagement, where we could have some of the nuances that the tabulated voting approach that could help illuminate some potential differences. I mean, I think I've said this a couple of times on this call, but sometimes I think we actually see more of a split between the Pacific Northwest and the Desert Southwest on a geographic basis in the EIM entity sector than we do between the investor-owned utilities and the public power utilities. So just looking to see where we can find those opportunities of alignment so that the sectors really do produce the right outcomes around consensus building and engagement with the SRC and with the stakeholder process itself. Kathleen, anything else you want to add here?
No, I think you covered it all. Thanks, Pam.
With that, maybe Sybil, do you still have your hand up or a new comment? Okay, Abby.
Thanks, Pam. Evie Call for the California Community Choice Association. And Pam, when you think about the RIF categories, just as a point of comparison, where would CCAs fit in that? They don't seem to fit because they aren't utilities. They're load-serving entities with no wires.
Evie, I think that is actually probably a gap in the current regional issues forum. We haven't, I think, to date seen a lot of engagement from CCAs, and I think is one of the opportunities that we're trying to close that gap by identifying some of the more transmission dependent utilities as a broader definition in the discussion document so that they could be included. But again, I think that is a gap that we haven't been able to close from the current RIF definitions. And I appreciate your perspective on that. And if you have feedback about an appropriate place for the CCAs.
Yeah, and I also just wanted to add, we're slightly different from maybe co-ops or others who own distribution too, because we own no wires. So we're not only transmission dependent, we are wires dependent completely. So I'm just, as you know from our comments, we just want to make sure that wherever we land in the end here, that we fit somewhere comfortably.
Thanks, Evie. Kathleen.
Great, thank you. It's Kathleen Colbert from Vistra. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I actually wanted to also share my perspective in response to Evie's question, because Pam, I appreciate your answer as well. For those who don't, I used to be a RIF liaison for the independent power producer and marketers sector, and it's one of the things that I think is less well understood is that that sector has a lot of load serving entities in it, whether it's a gap or not. That sector, you know, incorporates the CCAs and the ESPs. So electricity service providers, I think, are a cleaner fit. When you think about the IPP and marketer sector, it's not the IPP side, it's the marketer side that includes these types of load serving entities that don't have wires. And I just wanted to add that clarity for we you know, in the RIF, we make sure there's a home for anyone who wants a home today. That's where the home for the CCAs, I guess, would be. But we mostly only, I think as you look at the sector list, it's been most of the ESPs that have joined that sector, like more formally. I just wanted to share that context. There is actually a lot of load in that sector.
Thanks, Kathleen. IPP sector today is definitely one of the most diverse sectors. And a lot of the feedback we've heard is that there's a value in that diversity, that it enables the many different business models that some parent companies have underneath to really be represented in a single sector, but definitely invite perspectives on that to make sure that we are getting all of the diverse perspectives heard around how that independent sector should be represented.
Thanks, Pam, and Evie and Kathleen for your comments. That actually is a nice segue into my first check-in question before we launch into deep discussion on this. And actually, yeah, Serena, if you could launch the poll, and Sarah, if you could just bounce back to the previous slide so folks can see the sector proposal. So on a scale of 1 to 5, from 1 being disagree to 5 being agree, I see where my organization belongs within the current sector proposal. So just trying to get a sense of how far off base we are. All right, wait for a few more responses. We have about a third of folks who've responded. If you're on here, really curious to hear, because I think the goal here is to develop a sector proposal where folks feel that they have a home. And so really want to hear from you all if you feel like you have a home or not. All right, Serena, can we share the results? All right, great. So of folks who responded, happy to hear that about 70% of you do see somewhere that you belong within the current sector proposal. But that also means that 30% of you are less sure about that. And so that's what we really want to get into with our discussion today. Can we move forward a couple slides? All right, so particularly from those folks who were sort of on the 1, 2, 3 end of the scale of disagreeing with, I see where my organization fits within the current sector proposal. What is feeling challenging to you about the current sector proposal? What's where's the mismatch there? Dave.
Hi, Dave Zaverick with ACES. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. So we had actually submitted a question to the Pathways group about which sector embedded entities would fit in, embedded entities that are not EIM or EDAM entities, such as a large generation and transmission cooperative. We're not transmission dependent. We have our own transmission and generation. So still struggling to see which sector we would fit in. So if you could expound on that, that'd be great.
Dave, can you please state that again? I apologize. I was reading some of the questions in the chat.
Yeah, no problem. We had actually submitted a question about where embedded entities within an EIM entity would be. So we're not the balancing authority, but we're a load serving entity, a generation owner, transmission owner, such as a large G&T co-op. None of these sectors really seem to fit our structure. And so I was wondering where a larger G&T would fit in this proposal.
I think, again, that's one of those areas where it's a unique entity on very closely split between almost very close to an entity or a transmission dependent utility. And I think that those are some of those case by case bases where we'll have to really identify how to draw those lines. I think that if your resources are primarily non-participating, it's probably closer to a transmission dependent utility, but there's other opportunities if you're acting more actively in the market that we could consider some of those shifts. I think it really is a case by case basis, and that's why we do have a sector resolution process built into the SRC.
So, okay.
Go ahead, Dave.
Well, I was going to say thanks for that response. So I guess what I'm hearing is there's still no definitive answer to that at this point.
We've talked about it. We don't have a definitive answer to your specific question.
And actually, I'm interested for Dave and others who do not see themselves in the sectors that we had included in our discussion document. Sarah, if you'll go back to the comparison slide, I'm curious if in any of these lists, where do you see yourself belong, or is it in none of these?
I think, for example, in both SPP and MISO, there's a clear section for cooperatives. And my experience in SPP, for example, is most of those cooperatives are the G&T cooperatives in addition to distribution cooperatives. So, an abundance of generation and transmission. So when I look at the discussion document sectors, there's not a clear sector that really feels like a home there.
Gotcha. That's helpful. Thank you.
Sure.
Evie.
Yeah, thanks. So, at one point we were in transmission dependent utilities with our own seat, and I know there were others who didn't like it, but we're not really a transmission dependent utility. And there's no other obvious place on this list for CCAs as LSCs. So I think we're still struggling with this sector definition and would like to see greater clarity with a place that we obviously fit. And I think we handled it in the governance sectors at some point in a way that worked for us. So that might be a reference point.
in the
Thanks, Abby.
nominating committee. So
Yeah.
we didn't, in the final proposal, we did not include any sectors for the nominating committee because we wanted to have this, we wanted to be able to tie them so that we didn't have two different lists of sectors. So I'll go back and look. I can't remember.
Yeah,
what we had in there.
let's see, what was it? It was looking for it. Load serving entities that do not own transmission or distribution. So it was, that put us and the ESPs, I think, in the same bucket.
Okay.
So we
Thanks,
do have a number of questions in chat, and I think we'll take them before we get to Kathleen. So the first one is from Brian Turner with Advanced Energy United. It's not sure I saw any comments that supported the currently large IPP risk sector. Definitely saw a comment saying it was too large. I don't think anyone would call that a good thing. Brian, I understand that the demand response providers had some strong advocacy to be in their own sector. That's why we did include the DER sector in our discussion document. But I also believe we heard from others, and I don't want to speak for a sector that I'm not a member of, so I would ask that maybe Scott Olson or some of the other RIF liaisons who represented the diversity of the IPP sector, and Kathleen, maybe I'll give you notice that and ask you to address that since your hand is already raised. That because of the diversity of business models in that sector, that there was and the way that that sector kind of aggregates itself across a diverse group, that there was appreciation for remaining in a sector that a single sector that could encompass the many business models that a single parent company might have underneath. We also have a question from Kathleen Stockton with the Energy Division at the CPUC, which is, I represent the Energy Division of the Public Utility Commission. We are not a consumer advocate. We are more closely related to state agencies and SPP or state regulatory authorities and MISO. Again, we outside, okay, so great question. And outside of these sectors, which are part of the SRC, we also have the body of state representatives that has its own organizational structure and own advocacy opportunities to engage in the stakeholder process. Employees and staff of those commissions are open to engaging directly in the stakeholder process and also working through BOSSER as a unique advocacy opportunity there for the state commissions and their staff. We then have a question from Jessica Zana with Puget Sound Energy, and that is, there is an open question about where entities lie that are not participating member in the CAISO market, but interact with that market as a stakeholder. Again, we've never seen a sector for a non-participant in any market. If this is something that would be of interest to a competing market in the West, I think there's probably an opportunity to dialogue on that. But that until there is that kind of reciprocal representation, we do not think that it's appropriate to give a non-market participant an actual sector in the regional organization, but noting that with the open stakeholder process, any individual, whether they are a member of a sector or not, is open to engaging and participating in the policy development process, as well as in workshops or the different policy development stages, and also presenting their own perspectives to the board. They just would not have a specific sector or have the representation within that is afforded by being a member of that market. And again, I don't think there's any market anywhere that affords an opportunity for a non-participant to have a decisional voice. Okay, I think Michael notes that the BOSSER is the most appropriate place for commission staff to engage. And then I think we now can turn to our hand raised queue with Kathleen.
Hey, thanks, Pam. I did have a question but I can briefly respond to Brian Turner too, since you asked. Kathleen from Vistra used to be a liaison. So when I look at the sector layout in the discussion document, I had a similar reaction that Brian put in the chat. So yes, I think others feel that way, that the overly large IPP, independent transmission developer and marketer sector, doesn't afford an equal voice for that kind of shared principle. I mean, in my mind, the shared principle of that group is competitive markets provide more value for consumers, more competition leads to better outcomes and a more reliable market and grid. That's the principle that is shared by load serving entities, transmission developers, generation developers, et cetera, financial marketers. So when you have such a large sector, you really do go to first principles only. And it's very difficult to have that sector be able to represent like the supplier's impact, truly the impact to generation versus the transmission impact to those transmission developers. It does get muted. The other thing is that that's just one of the 9 sectors, and there's many sectors here that are represented by more of a load serving entity with those business models of whether they're rate-based or public power, or which is very different than competitive companies. So I agree with Brian, but that is neither here nor there. My question for you was, though, that Dave's question about where these kind of G&T and sub entities that are nested within an EIM entity or an EDAM entity, I thought was really insightful. It flagged for me something I had assumed, and so wanted to tease out for you, Pam and Kathleen, see if you can help put a little more detail on this. So within the EIM, we have EIM sub-entities, and the way that Dave described his organization, it would fit that criteria to be eligible for a sub-entity, albeit it has to go through an approval process with its TSP that it's within. Have you explicitly tackled that? I would have assumed the sub-entities were in sectors 1 or 2, depending on whether it's parent TSP opts into EDAM or not.
Kathleen, I'm currently not aware of anyone who's gone through the registration process in the sub-entity category. And so I think that that is a really helpful potential way to differentiate some of these, like to answer the question around some of these entities, like a larger GNT that could be in a couple different places. So I appreciate those comments and a way to maybe think about some opportunities for delineation based on that registration process. Mary.
Thanks, Pam. This is Mary Minke again with the Public Generating Pool. And I wonder if you just help me. I think you talked about this a little bit already in terms of how we should be thinking about sort of the purpose of each of these sectors. And I heard Kathleen was talking about kind of the underlying or common principle across entities in the sector. But I've been thinking about it more in the context of sort of the functional role that each sector plays in the market. And you may not have a fully sort of common set of principles or approaches within that sector, but yet they're sort of functionally similar. And so you're kind of doing the best that you can to find kind of a common sort of interface with the market. But I think, I guess I just start to think that it's pretty challenging to sort of try to get to a place where the sectors will be groups of people who all agree with each other all the time, or trying to get to common sets of positions. So I do think you talked about this already, but I wonder if you just talk a little bit more about how you're thinking about it and any advice for us on how to think about sort of the purpose that each sector is performing in this construct.
Mary, I think that's a very insightful and nuanced question. And you're right. I think that we've been clear that there are frequently differences of perspective within sectors, and that we expect that to continue to be the case. I think there's many initiatives where we're sure we can all think of different initiatives where allies have, the allies that you had the last time are on different sides of the fence in the next question, and that those differences are not limited to business model or geographic location or resource mix, but that commonality can be found among any diverse group over a different period of time. The role of the sectors is really to help provide some of that organizational framework that can help start the process of identifying areas of commonality or areas of divergence. And that the role of the sector representative is not to represent their own interests or their own company's interests, but to be able to aggregate the different perspectives from within their sector and help bring those forward to policy staff as well as to the board, and be a point of contact that can help provide some of the nuance around those differences, as well as to start creating a space where commonality might be found. And that could be either between, like within the sector or between sectors, much like it takes place today, but with a slightly more structured approach that hopefully will help contribute to and facilitate that drive towards collaboration and engagement, and also to help really illuminate where those points of friction are so that they can get resolved more quickly through the stakeholder process. It is not meant to substitute for any particular entity's engagement, and I hope that that's become clear through this process, that we expect individual stakeholders to provide their ongoing advocacy. I think we've heard strongly, especially from market staff and from board members, that the comment process is one of the ways that board members are able to really understand different stakeholder perspectives. And so by this aggregation of sectors, we are not looking to disintermediate the engagement directly between individual organizations and decision-making representatives of the RO or of the board. But I think that it is important to help clarify how those sectors can get brought together, and to help begin to work through that process of providing more direct guidance through the initiative development process. Kathleen, do you want to add anything?
No, I think that was great.
Hey, Alan.
Hi, Alan Meck from PG&E. I wanted to go back to the response to is it Jessica? I'm gonna butcher this name, Jessica Zanow. I hope that was okay. And her concern on behalf of Puget Sound. I wanted to try and give maybe a slightly more robust answer, because I think that it deserves some more consideration. The idea that, what if we're not participating in EDAM, but we're an outside entity and we want to be able to, and we feel like we're being locked out. Obviously, in the current CAISO process, these outside entities have had the opportunity to engage, and now not having a sector can feel like, well, now they're being shut out of the process. And please correct me if I'm not stating this correctly, but my understanding is that the role of the sectors is actually kind of limited. And so these outside entities, everyone is still going to have the chance to submit comments, to vote in the process and have a say. It's just that there might not be a sector, but I don't think that that's going to be, I hope that that's actually not the bread and butter of policy making and policy design. As a California IOU, we're kind of locked into a very small sector, and I am hoping that that doesn't confine us to, I'm expecting that when we start having these discussions within the EDAM construct, I'm going to be having open dialogue with some of like the Pacific Northwest entities like Seattle City Light and PGE, et cetera, because we're all load serving entities within the EDAM construct.
Yes, Alan, I think that that's a clear distinction. I appreciate your adding that nuance. I think again, the goal is to promote and facilitate collaboration. And I appreciate how, especially through the EDAM process, there has been a lot of engagement between the California parties and the regional parties. I think we continue to see strengthening relationships there. And we hope that our proposal here encourages the ongoing strengthening of those relationships so that that collaboration can continue to take place both at the individual level and then across sectors. I think the distinction here is that the sectors are focused on market participants, and that while the process remains open to all parties, whether you are a registered member of a sector or not, that if you are not a market participant, that there is not a separate sector for external parties, and that is very that's not a sector that's represented in any organized market to date. I would note that I think in the early days of the Regional Issues Forum, there was a sector called Neighboring Adjacent Balancing Authority, and that over time, as that sector became smaller, it was removed from the Regional Issues Forum sector definitions. And I would note that that is representative of a different purpose for the Regional Issues Forum in its startup period, which was to promote education and collaboration between the West and the EIM, when the EIM parties were a minority of the parties in the West, and that there were extensive opportunity to create a platform for dialogue between adjacent balancing authorities and EIM participating balancing authorities, but that in a stakeholder process around defining the rules for market participants, there isn't a sector for non-market participants to define the rules that they would not themselves be subject to. Colin.
Hi, is everyone able to hear me?
Yes.
Yep. Awesome. So I wanted to quickly comment on something that was said earlier, and correct me if I'm kind of misinterpreting the comment I'm responding to, but it was about the value of having broad-based sectors, so that companies that have sort of multiple different types of business models within their overarching kind of company structure can represent all of those within their sector. I see the kind of reason for that line of thinking. A lot of companies do at this point have different branches that operate under different types of business models. But in my mind, that doesn't create a justification for eliminating or not breaking up sectors that are too large, if there are a number of companies in that sector who only have a single business model. Because companies that have multiple business models would presumably choose whichever sector they, that their primary business model connects to, but they could still represent the other parts of their business within how that larger sector votes, or how they vote within that sector. So in my mind, there's not a reduction in representation for companies with multiple types of business models if they have to choose between different sectors where multiple sectors may represent different parts of their business. But there is a loss of representation if companies with a single business model don't have a sector to kind of represent that business model, or can only join a sector that represents a number of other types of business models, because then there's a risk that those voices, which are likely minority voices, would be drowned out in the voting process or in the discussion process. And I agree with what we just said about, you know, the sectors in the SRC not being the be all and end all of how different companies are represented in discussions and in the process. But there is value to making sure that a specific sector has representation on the SRC, because in my understanding, the SRC operates on a one sector, one vote principle. And so even if the voting is advisory, if a specific type of business model is not represented in the SRC, then their vote or their interests in that advisory or indicative voting process may not be represented, may never come to light, may never be seen by the RO board, may be sort of drowned out by larger voices that are in if they are forced to join a much broader sector that has a number of different business models in which they are a minority voice.
Thanks, Colin. Jessica?
Yeah, thank you very much. I just wanted to clarify something. Alan's conversation just raised it for me. So my understanding in the proposal was that any entity could register to participate in the stakeholder process, but it sounds like among other groups of people that may not be represented, there may be a group that of folks that are external to the market interacting with the market. And so am I understanding correctly that those individuals could not register, participate, or they would register, but they would not be placed into a sector? Thank you very much.
So anyone is able to participate in the stakeholder process and directly engage with staff or the board, whether you're registered or not. Registration is not a condition of participation, but it is a condition to be a member of a sector. You have to self-select into a sector. So while the stakeholder process and direct engagement with policy staff or the board or management is completely open to any and all entities and comers, regardless of your sector or status or affiliation, to be a member of a sector, you have to be a market participant. Does that provide enough clarification?
Yeah, thank you, Pam. And I guess the example that I would just refer to is, for example, the independent sector in Markets Plus has a strong voting role in that market, and it has entities that are not participants and have no financial stake in the market. And so I guess I would just draw on that example. I will acknowledge, I agree with you that there's not a clear role for IOUs, for example, to interact in a voting capacity with Markets Plus other than through an industry organization. And so maybe that's kind of the same relationship here with this framework for folks external to the EDAM. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Jessica. We have an active chat. So lots of conversation. Yeah, about where PSC might belong or might want to be. Lots of active discussion about LSEs, LREs, and the DER sector. Comment from Michael about the DER sector and its relationship to whether and how EJ community representatives might see the market. A comment from Mike Florio about one vote for more sectors rather than fewer. Mike, do I understand that to mean more sectors, but each sector maintains just having one vote?
Sectors don't have votes. He's just voting for having more sectors, I think.
Got it. Thank you, Kathleen. Anyone who has contributed to this active chat, is there anyone who would like to share their comments live for those who maybe are not able to follow the written chat?
Okay. This is Michael from EDF. I'll be brave and I'll go on camera or I'll go on audio. I think a point that I was trying to make is whether it is the right thing for the ongoing operations or not, there is going to be a varying level of trust in this new market structure that we're setting up. And I think as we're thinking through what are the sectors and what needs to be there, I think more people are going to want a seat at the table to just sort of understand this. And then we might want to consolidate or review after operating for a year or two. And once we kind of have built up that trust. And so the comment that I was making in the chat was about the distributed energy resources. EDF is not an environmental justice organization. We don't claim to be one, but we work very closely with a lot of them. And the biggest complaint that we have had about the pathways process to date has been, well, we don't need all of these markets. We have distributed energy resources. That's what's going to save us. And whether you agree with that notion or not, the EJ community has been very skeptical about doing anything on markets because they think distributed resources are the way to go. So if we as a Pathways group are recommending a set of sectors without actually having DERs sort of having an affirmative seat at the table, it sort of by extension just underscores the distrust of this process from the EJ community. Now, again, I think there is probably a way to navigate that relatively well, but since there was a conversation about the DERs maybe or maybe not having a seat there, I just wanted to sort of say I think there's a lot of value in maintaining that. So it's number 9 on this list. I think it should stay there, but I just wanted to kind of flag that again.
Thanks, Michael, for sharing more detail on that comment. So
Neha, if I might just jump in real fast too, and I think just to respond really quickly, Michael, I think you make some really important points. And there's a lot of perspective, there's a lot of perception and some of these, frankly, political challenges that we're trying to navigate here. And I think we're trying to balance that with, as we talked about at the top of this call, being able to actually show up and participate. It's one thing to have a seat on paper. It's another thing to have your voice actually heard. And so I think what we're trying to do is find the best way for these companies and organizations and sectors, whether it's an official sector or not. There's a lot of, sort of subsector ways to characterize groups. We're trying to find the most meaningful way for them to be able to get their input and voices heard. And so I think that is the balance that I think we continue to struggle with. So welcome ongoing input into that sort of challenge here too.
Thanks. I'll turn the floor to Mike Florio.
Yes, thank you. I put in the comment about preferring more sectors rather than fewer, kind of along the same lines Michael was talking about, only a little more generally, is I think this is something that we're trying to market to the world, and having an obvious home for people, even if it's only initially and there is later consolidation. I think for someone to look at this and say, oh yeah, there's a sector that I really fit in, is a selling point for this whole effort. And it may very well be that, you end up with fairly small sectors that don't make sense to continue on indefinitely. But I think that marketing aspect of it is important.
Thanks for that, Mike. Yeah, so that sort of takes us to the last discussion question I have, which, folks have already touched on in their comments about what's working for them, what's not working for them with the current proposal. Getting to, your ideas and solutions for how do we balance this need for wanting everyone to have a home, a place that they feel that they belong, but also, recognizing that we do still want, as we talked about before, with our goals for the Stakeholder Representatives Committee, we want it to be efficient. We want it to be able to be a body that encourages and is able to work towards compromise. So I think I've heard throughout our discussion today a handful of recommendations that, maybe some of this is nomenclature. Maybe it's a matter of like redefining or using different language for how we're defining these sectors. There's the one about, like non-transmission and distribution owning load serving entities as one possible little bit of a mouthful. I saw in the chat something earlier about, oh shoot, I'm struggling to find it now, but about redefining EIM and EDAM as participants as opposed to entities. So just curious to hear from y'all if you have further ideas about different nomenclature that you would use, or other solutions or options that you would offer to the launch committee and the stakeholder process work group as they're refining this proposal, trying to make sure everyone has a home, but also balancing that with not wanting it to be too unruly.
I will just note that I don't see the comment on EIM or EDAM participant, but EIM and EDAM entity are defined terms in the tariff, as is participating transmission owner. And I think that's the driver behind that choice, is that it's a clearly defined term that is part that can be tied back to the tariff.
Thanks, Pam.
It is a funny word, EIM entity, EDAM entity, which is, I think, gotten used to it.
Yeah, I'll see if I can find the particular comment. And I'm not as steeped in the language and definitions as you all, so I'm not sure what the implications would be of modifying that definition. Let's see, some, again, active chat about the IPP sector and the DER sector and LSCs and LREs. CAC Stewart and Colin. I believe Kathleen has also been active in that conversation. Would any of you like to bring that into the live chat? You might be able to summarize the discussion thus far better than I can.
I'm curious if there's other members. Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. I'd invite Kathleen to go first. That's who's speaking.
I think that was actually Pam.
Well,
Pam, you had a question?
This is Colin. I just wanted to clarify one thing, which is that when I say there's difference of opinion between behind the meter and front of meter companies, I think that really boils down to what sorts of policy initiatives or adjustments they prioritize. So even though you could probably, conceptually plot each organization out on paper and like say this one agrees more on first principles. These two agree more on first principles than these other two. What really matters is like which policies are companies going to coalesce around in terms of priorities. Because if two companies don't prioritize the same issues, then they won't ever have consensus around which policy changes or adjustments to push through the policy catalog process. So even if two companies seem like conceptually similar, if their priorities for how the market should be run or be adjusted are in divergent directions, I would argue that it would be very difficult for them to be part of the same sector and reach consensus on what should be put forward.
Thanks for that additional detail, Colin. Pam.
I would just invite any of there's been a lot of dialogue on the IPP sector. I think we've lost a couple of our participants that I've heard advocate for that more organized perspective, but if anyone's on that wants to share their thoughts, please do so.
All right, hearing none, I want to thank you all for your active participation and discussion today. I think this conversation gave some more color as to the challenges that folks are having with the sector proposal as it stands today. Want to move to our next step so you all know what's coming next. One more slide, Sarah. Great, thank you. So the conversation that y'all had today, including the active conversation in the chat, all of that will be shared with the stakeholder process work group if they're not here today already and listening to you live. And they are going to put together an updated sector proposal, and we'll share that out with the mailing list by October 14th, so 1 week from today. And your opportunity to comment on that revised sector proposal is the same as your opportunity to comment on the draft step 2 proposal overall. So there's a comment template that's available on the Weeb website, and all of those comments will be due by October 25th. And the the launch committee will take those as they do a revised step 2 proposal. Any questions about what happens next or opportunities to shape what happens next? Great. And then I think this might have been shared in a previous call, maybe one of the larger Pathways calls. But so this is certainly your opportunity to provide comment. If you have any questions, again, questions, not comments. Questions are going to help you to inform your comments. You can also email those to the comments at Westwide or to the Pathways email if you have any questions, for example, like about the step 2 proposal as it stands. And thank you, Serena. Serena has linked to the comment template in the chat, as well as a feedback survey. So if you have any thoughts on how the workshop went today, positive, negative, in between, we're always trying to get better. So we'd appreciate any feedback that you have to offer. Pam, Kathleen, anything you'd like to say to close us out?
I just want to thank everybody. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Pam.
No, go ahead, Kathleen, you start.
I just want to thank everybody for their participation and input in here, and helping us find the right balance. And again, reminder, this will continue to evolve, and this entire process is going to be an ongoing evolution. So we appreciate your willingness to participate today.
And I echo Kathleen's remarks and share my thanks for GridWorks for being willing to facilitate this bonus workshop. I think we really benefit from your help and structure with bringing this group together. And so just thank you everyone for the robust conversation today. Certainly provided a lot of nuance and additional thought to consider as we recrafted this sector proposal. So thank you.
All right, thanks all. Have a good rest of your week.
Thanks, everyone.